And welcome to this week's edition of Freeze Frame. This week in Ole Miss football, I'm David Johnson along with Brandon Redd. And it's a week of recovery for the Ole Miss Rebels after a 66-31 loss to the Texas Longhorns before a national television audience in Oxford last Saturday. Ole Miss looking effective on the offensive side and anything but on the defensive side of the football.
No question about it. Offensively, I thought we did some good things. We hit some open wide receivers. And you know, Wallace started a little slow, but he seemed to come into his own a little bit as the game went on. Defensively, couldn't stop the run, and really Texas did anything they wanted to against us.
Brandon, heading into this game against Texas last Saturday, if you had told me Ole Miss would have scored 31 points, I would have been convinced that they would have been in this football game. I don't think anyone saw the domination coming from Texas on the offensive side of the football the way it played out Saturday night before a sold-out Vaught Hemingway crowd and, as we mentioned, a national television audience. On the night, Texas gained 676 total yards of offense. They did anything and everything whenever they wanted to do it. The numbers tell it out. Rushing for 350 yards, passing for 326, averaging 8.7 yards every time they snapped the football.
Well, there's no question about that. When we were talking about this game, I thought it was going to be a close one. I wasn't sure if it'd be Ole Miss or Texas to come out on top, but like you said, David, Texas, they came in, they did what they wanted to, and it's alarming the amount of rushing yards they got with 350 yards on the ground. Our defensive line really struggled last Saturday.
61,797, the official attendance for that ball game. It was the fourth largest crowd to ever watch a football game in Oxford, Mississippi, and the largest crowd to ever watch the Rebels play a non-conference foe in Oxford. On the offensive side, though, as bad as it was on the defensive side, Ole Miss showed that they could move the football, they can score points against what is considered to be one of the best defenses in America.
Yeah, and going back to the crowd real quick, you know, that was one thing that did not disappoint, you know, going to the Grove or seeing the amount of fans. It was rocking before kickoff, and then heading to the offensive side, you know, Coach Freeze really did a good job, I thought, of dialing some things up, and he adjusted well. This is still offensively a team that we see that continues to adjust with and Texas had a good defense. Now they're getting pressure on Bo Wallace, and I thought Freeze did a nice job adjusting offensively.
Kudos go to the Ole Miss fan base for what they did Saturday. They kept this Ole Miss football team in the ball game with an incredible atmosphere for about a quarter and a half. Texas led 10-0 after the first quarter, and Ole Miss immediately responded with a 12-play, 89-yard drive against this Texas defense to cut the score to 10-7 early in the second quarter. Texas's offense, though, responds immediately. 69-yard run from Marquis Goodwin for a 17-7 lead. Ole Miss kept on fighting. They respond. 39-yard field goal from Bryson Rose cuts the score to 17-10, about the halfway mark of the second quarter. Then it was all Texas.
And you know, we heard Freeze say after the game that he wishes the game would have been a little bit closer to keep those fans in it a lot longer. I think he was proud of the way the fans came out and supported. He just wishes the team would have kept the score closer so that maybe those fans would have been a little more rowdy longer.
Longhorns scored the last 14 points of the first half, led 31-10 at the intermission, and then come out immediately in the third quarter, pop another one in. It's 38-10 at that point, and you could Katie bar the barn door, so to speak. Bevo had moved, and the route was on, so to speak. Ole Miss, however, fought to the very end. You got to hand it to the guys. A very spirited effort out there. Just not enough to stop Texas quarterback David Ash, who completed 19 of 23 for 326 yards and 4 touchdowns. Ash on the night not sacked at all, very rarely harassed, as the Texas offensive line dominated in the trenches.
Yeah, our defensive line really struggled. You know, and kudos to our guys, no doubt about it. They played their hearts out. I tell you though, David, every time we would score, that Texas offense would march right back down the field and answer the call.
Ole Miss offense accumulated 399 yards of total offense, averaged 6.7 yards per snap against the Longhorns. Bo Wallace, his roughest night of his young Ole Miss career, 13 of 24 for 178 yards and a touchdown. Bo also gained 43 yards rushing, but 5 sacks, left him with a net of 8 yards. You're listening to Freeze Frame This Week in Ole Miss Football. We'll be right back. And welcome back to Freeze Frame This Week in Ole Miss Football. David Johnson and Brandon Redd with you from Rebels247.com. Ole Miss now turns their attention to the Tulane Green Wave, an 11 a.m. kickoff set for the Superdome in New Orleans Saturday morning. And before we start breaking this thing down, we've got to look at some of the adversity the Tulane football team has faced thus far this season. First of all, Hurricane Isaac, Tropical Storm Isaac, blows into the Gulf Coast, and the Tulane football team has to evacuate 2 days during their week of practice prior to their season opener against Rutgers. So they move up to Birmingham for a couple of days to prepare for that game. Then Tulane head football coach Curtis Johnson hospitalized with heat fatigue during camp this summer as well. And then, of course, the absolute tragic incident involving senior safety Devin Walker. It happened September the 8th in the first half against the Tulsa Golden Hurricane, the last play of the half in what was a 35-0 ball game at that point. A collision with his own teammate on a tackle made in the middle of the field, and Devin is still hospitalized now in a rehab unit in Tulsa, Oklahoma, diagnosed with a cervical spine fracture. And our thoughts and prayers are certainly with Devin Walker. The Ole Miss Rebels will wear stickers on their helmets Saturday in the Tulane game, the initials DW on the Ole Miss helmets in honor of Devin Walker.
Yeah, what a devastating injury, And when he got hit, if you watch the replay, it doesn't look too serious, but then as you see the guys rush out and having CPR performed on the field, it had to be a scary sight for the players, for the fans, and for the family that was there watching the whole situation. Like you said, David, our prayers, our thoughts have to go out to that family, to the fans, and to Devin himself. We're praying for you out there, Devin.
I was watching that ball game on television and saw the hit live on TV. And, it took about 25 seconds or so before everybody fully grasped that this was a serious injury. And then some of the television shots, there were coaches tearing up and crying on the sidelines. You knew it was a very, very serious issue, and it still remains so. And Devin Walker and his family are faced with a tremendous obstacle and challenge in front of them as he continues to recover. And I want to pass along, there are a couple of websites that you can go to help support Devin Walker's rehabilitation and his recovery. One is www.tulane.edu/Devin Walker, and another is Support Devin at tulane.edu. Support Devin. Devin is spelled D-E-V-O-N. Again, this is the senior safety that suffered a cervical spine fracture in the Green Waves game on September the 8th at Tulsa. Devin Walker, also a New Orleans native. This will lend itself to being a very emotionally charged atmosphere Saturday at the Superdome. Not only is he a member of that Green Wave football team, but he's also a New Orleans native.
Yeah, no doubt. And this is their first game back since that injury, and they plan on trying to do something for him. And I'm so thankful and glad that Freeze and company have decided to wear the sticker on their helmets. We want to honor and respect that family and that team for such a such a devastating accident that happened on the field. And like you said, David, we know all too well about this situation.
Yeah, memories of Chucky Mullen certainly come fresh to the mind when you're talking about a situation like this. A little bit about Devin Walker. He is a cell and molecular biology major, earned his football scholarship at Tulane after walking on the team in 2009. He was Tulane's starting strong safety against Tulsa, and he had the best game of his career in his season opener against Rutgers this year, recording a team-high 9 tackles. Also want to tell you, too, those of you who don't want to visit the website, you can also donate by check by sending a check to the Devin Walker's Fund in care of Tulane football, James W. Wilson Jr. Center on Ben Weiner Drive, New Orleans, Louisiana, 70118. Attention, Devin Walker.
Yeah, that would be something great to do, and I encourage everybody that's listening to do what you can to help this situation out.
Devin Walker certainly in the thoughts and prayers of not only Tulane fans and Ole Miss fans, but in college football fans all across the country. And our thoughts and prayers do go out to Devin Walker and his family. Again, Walker's still in Tulsa, Oklahoma. They're unable to move him right now. He has been moved from St. Francis Hospital into a rehab unit there. And again, an entire nation prays for Devin Walker as he fights this challenge.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a long road back, and we hope it's as quick as possible.
All right, when we come back on Freeze Frame, we'll begin breaking down the Tulane Green Wave. 11 a.m. kickoff Saturday morning from the Louisiana Superdome. And welcome back to Freeze Frame. This week in Ole Miss football, David Johnson and Brandon Redd joining you here. And the Ole Miss Rebels will play the Tulane Green Wave at 11 o'clock Saturday morning from the Louisiana Superdome. Ole Miss enters this ball game 2-1 overall, 0-0 inside the SEC. Tulane 0-2 overall, 0-1 inside Conference USA. It's time to start taking a look at the Tulane Green Wave, and we'll start on the offensive side of the football where, Brandon, I have to be honest with you, this is one of the most amazing statistics I've ever uncovered here. Through 2 football games, the Tulane offense has rushed the football 45 times. 45 times Tulane has went to the ground. Out of those 45 rushing attempts, they have garnered 15, a grand total of 15 yards.
Yeah, like we've talked about, David. I mean, that has to be kind of hard to do just to only get that amount of yards in 2 games. That's 7.5 yards averaging rushing a game.
That's averaging 12 inches per rush attempt. 1 foot per rush attempt.
I mean, it's really unbelievable, and it's something that, honestly, I've never seen before.
When you look at a number like that, it has to speak volumes about what kind of push or lack of push your offensive line is getting up front, which certainly bodes well for an Ole Miss defense that's reeling after a debacle against Texas to be able to go into the Superdome on Saturday morning and kind of start feeling better about themselves.
Yeah, this is a type game that, as a defensive lineman, you look to build confidence in. You got pushed around all night against Texas. You head into Tulane now, you're down in New Orleans against the offensive line that's young and against the offensive line that hasn't been able to move anybody. So it's your turn to get penetration and move them back.
And the Tulane offense also entering this ball game an injured offense. There is speculation afoot whether or not their starting quarterback, Ryan Griffin, who has 32 starts under his belt as the Tulane quarterback, will play or will he not play, or how much will he play. Griffin suffers a shoulder injury and has to leave the game September the 8th at Tulsa, and still not back 100% at practice, yet Curtis Johnson not ready to pull the plug on the fact of whether or not he will be in the ball game Saturday.
I mean, and you look at, and like we were just talking about, you look at a team that can't run the football, so they're automatically going to rely on the passing game, and now they're likely without their starting quarterback. You look at this offensive team, David, I mean, they're in some big trouble.
Without their starting quarterback, they will turn to a true freshman, a young man who was playing high school football this time last year, Devin Powell. He's a 6'3", 205-pound New Orleans native. Powell is a dual-threat quarterback, seems to have the confidence of head coach Curtis Johnson. But what else is a head coach going to say? You gotta run what you brung, so to speak. And Powell is likely what he's bringing to the contest on Saturday.
Yeah, and then you look at the speed of the Ole Miss defense. Yes, they allowed 66 points against Texas, but he hasn't seen this type of speed from the secondary, from the linebackers, guys that know how to run, and an SEC type speed. He's not going to be accustomed to it coming straight out of high school.
An inexperienced freshman quarterback going up against an SEC defense, even one that was shredded by Texas last week, seems to spell trouble for the Green Wave in this one on Saturday. And again, we just talked about this, but it certainly looks like an opportunity for the Ole Miss defense to start feeling good about itself again, to go out and have maybe even a dominating performance against an offense that's young, beat up, and has been brutalized its first two ball games.
Yeah, no doubt, and that's what Coach Womack's been talking about this week. That the guys seem confident, they're ready to go into this game, but until we can actually take it to the field and see how we do on the field, he believes that's the best way to build confidence. And Dave, this is the time to do it. If you're going to build confidence against the offensive line, now's the time to go for it.
2 games into the 2012 season, the Green Wave's top running back, Orleans Darkwa, has yet to play a ball game. Sprained an ankle during preseason camp, did not play against Rutgers, did not play against Tulsa. There is a possibility Tulane could get somewhat of a lift if he can play against the Rebels on Saturday. Darkwa's a 6', 210-pounder. He rushed for 924 yards last year, finished second in all of Conference USA with 1,229 all-purpose yards, but he's still walking around with a limp in his giddy-up at practice, according to media reports coming out of New Orleans.
Yeah, there's no question. And he might bring a little spark to this offense, but with nobody blocking in front of him, I expect him to get hit behind the line of scrimmage early and often Saturday.
Stat of the week, 45 rushes for 15 yards. That is what Tulane is averaging on the ground heading into Saturday's ball game. You're listening to Freeze Frame. This week in Ole Miss football, we'll be right back to break down the Tulane defense. Okay, we've talked about the youth and inexperience on the offensive side of the football for Tulane. That also applies to the defensive side for the Green Wave as well. The Ole Miss offense averaging over 500 yards per contest, and Bo Wallace gets to throw against a secondary on Saturday morning that has a 4-man rotation at the cornerback positions. 3 of those 4 cornerbacks are true freshmen.
And Bo Wallace has to be kind of licking his chops a little bit at this situation. Bo, he's a guy that looked a little nervous against Texas at the beginning, but he started to settle down. He started to see his reads, and I was rather impressed with Bo's third quarter on, second quarter on. Now, first quarter he was shaky. There's no question about that. But Bo's the type guy that when he's on, he's almost unstoppable.
One of those true freshman cornerbacks, a name Ole Miss fans may remember, especially those of you who follow recruiting. Jordan Batiste from Southern Louisiana was an Ole Miss commitment, a very solid Ole Miss commitment while Houston Nutt was still coaching the Rebels in 2011. Hugh Freeze and staff get to town and decide they want to go a different direction, and Jordan Batiste ends up at Tulane, and he's playing a critical role for the Green Wave in his true freshman season.
Yeah, there's no question that he's one of those guys that was on board, and now he's not. And you look and say, well, what could he be doing here at Ole Miss? But that happens all the time, in recruiting, where sometimes you get a guy and he's a bust, or sometimes you let a guy go and he ends up being great. And that's part of that recruiting battle that you just never know what's going to happen.
I wouldn't think for a second that Curtis Johnson, the Tulane head coach, would try to go one-on-one coverage with Dante Moncrief a true freshman cornerback. So you can expect Moncrief to probably have to battle through some double teams on Saturday during this football game, which will likely mean that someone else is going to have the one-on-one coverage. Could be a big night for Jamez Logan or a Vince Sanders to finally arrive on the scene for the Rebel offense this season.
I think you hit the nail on the head with that statement, David. I expect safety coverage on top of Moncrief with maybe a man-to-man or try to zone him out some. But there's been yet one corner that's been able to stop Dante Moncrief, and I truly believe he's one of the best wide receivers in the country. So no doubt about it. Somebody like Philander Moore or maybe even Collins Moore or Jamez Logan, they got to step up, got to start making the plays, and that's going to be throughout this season. Those guys are going to need to make plays. We can't always rely on Dante Moncrief.
The Rebels rank second in the SEC in total offense, averaging 500.7 yards per game. Also second in rushing yardage, averaging 245 yards per game, getting it done through the air as well, as Bo Wallace has thrown for 616 yards in his first 3 games. And Moncrief, as you mentioned, added to the Biletnikoff Award watch list earlier this week in 3 ball games. Dante Moncrief, 18 catches, 320 yards, and 3 touchdowns, and the Texas defense did nothing to slow down Dante Moncrief.
And, that's a great Texas defense, and they couldn't contain him. And if a play's not reversed, you add another touchdown to his stats and about another 40 yards to that amount. So he's a guy that I really expect all year long to dominate corners, and that's no matter who the Rebels are playing.
Meanwhile, the Tulane defense didn't do bad against Rutgers, but Rutgers, a more conventional pro-style, run it between the tackles style of attack. However, Tulsa's offense, very similar to what Ole Miss puts on the field. They like to spread it out, but they like the end result to be balanced between the pass and the run. The Golden Hurricane puts up 651 total yards of offense on the Green Wave back on September the 8th. And Tulane, not a very compatible defense going against a spread attack.
No doubt, because those guys are going to be spread all over the field. And then I expect people like, Randall Mackey and folks, even in the running game for this Ole Miss offense to have a big day. I look for our offensive line to get better, and our offensive line has to continue to get better pass coverage.
Mentioned how young Tulane is in their secondary. They're also starting 2 freshmen on the defensive line Saturday. And an interesting point about the offensive line, the Ole Miss offensive line, their struggles have been well documented. They did not protect Bo Wallace very well last Saturday against Texas. However, this is probably the best offensive line Tulane will have faced thus far this season, and they've only gotten to the opposing quarterback one time all year.
You add great protection from the Rebels and then a young secondary by Tulane, and that gives Wallace plenty of times to kind of pick those guys apart, and I expect that to happen, David.
It's hard to imagine anything but a huge day for the Ole Miss offense on Saturday. Yardage should actually come in droves for Hugh Freeze and company, both through the air and on the ground. What should be gross offensive numbers ought to be tempered only by how soon Coach Freeze decides to take his foot off the gas pedal, and that may be determined by how good the Ole Miss defense or how not good the Ole Miss defense is performing against the Tulane offense.
Yeah, no question. This is the game for this defense to build some confidence.
You're listening to Freeze Frame This Week in Ole Miss Football. We'll be right back to wrap it up and give you our picks right after this. And welcome back to Freeze Frame. This week in Ole Miss football, David Johnson and Brandon Redd, both of Rebels247.com, joining you here this week. Brandon, it is time now to pick this football game. I didn't do too well on the Ole Miss-Texas game. I was in the zone on how many points I thought the Rebels would score. Never in my life did I believe Texas would hang 66 on the Ole Miss defense. This week I hope to rebound. We'll start with you. Ole Miss at Tulane. What do you think will happen Saturday? How's this one going to play out? Your final score.
Okay, I think it's going to be a lopsided score for the Rebels. My final score I got predicted is 48-13. And I think Tulane, will have a little bit of success in the passing game. They'll be able to hit a couple field goals and maybe get a touchdown late because of maybe defense, and we run away with it pretty easily.
Adversity is hard to respond to. Tulane has more than their fair share of adversity already this season. Plus, they're running into a superior opponent on Saturday in the form of the Ole Miss Rebels. Ole Miss fans can identify with what it's like when you run into a vastly superior opponent. I look for this to almost kind of be Texas in reverse, except I expect the Ole Miss defense to play better than what the Texas defense played Ole Miss. Ole Miss at Tulane. My score, Ole Miss 55, Tulane 7.
Yeah, there's no doubt. This is the game, and I've said it multiple times this show, for Ole Miss to build confidence. This is the time for the defensive line, and that's going to be the thing I really key on most of the game is how does this defensive line respond, and how's the pressure, and how's the gap assignments in the running game against a Tulane offensive line that's just not very good.
This ball game kicking off at 11 a.m. Central Time from the Superdome in New Orleans will be televised on FSN for those Rebel fans not making the trip down into the Big Easy for this one. And I would expect a high-scoring offensive charge by Ole Miss, and for Bo Wallace to have a tremendously big day. I would also expect Jeff Scott, Randall Mackey. Dante Moncrief may have a lot of attention shed on him Saturday, so it may open the gates for the possibility of another Ole Miss wide receiver to have some big numbers down there. Keep your eye on Jamez Logan. Keep your eyes on Vince Sanders.
Yeah, no doubt. Vince Sanders is one of those guys that when he's on, he's unstoppable. And Jamez Logan, he's a great possession-type receiver. He has solid hands, and he's a real good route runner. Those guys will need to step up, and I think they will Saturday.
All-time, Ole Miss has a 129-52-2 record against Conference USA schools. The Rebels are 2-1 for the first time since 2009. Ole Miss was 1-2 after 3 games last season. Tulane and Ole Miss have played each other a lot of times. This is one of the South's most traditional rivalries. It's lopsided in favor of the Rebels. This will be the 71st meeting between Ole Miss and Tulane. Ole Miss holds a 42-28 advantage in the series and have won 26 of the 51 games played in New Orleans.
If I'm playing on the Ole Miss Rebel team right now, I just look at this opponent and I say this is what we needed after a tough loss against Texas. History's on our side. And when you look at offensively, defensively, everything matches up perfectly for the Rebels to go in there and take care of business.
I'd be remiss if I didn't bring this up. Both of these ball clubs led by men of very strong Christian faith and character. Hugh Freeze, as Ole Miss fans are certainly aware of, always one eager to share his faith in the Lord. Curtis Johnson, the same way at Tulane, a Christian head football coach that invokes that Christianity and that level of morality into his Tulane football program.
Yeah, these two guys are great leaders, and no matter what the situation, whether they're up or down, they're going to get the best out of their guys, and that's more than just on the football field.
Ole Miss and Tulane, 11 a.m. kickoff. You can get all of your coverage at Rebels247.com. We will certainly have the quick game summary that will post up right at the end of the ball game, complete with photo galleries and all kind of stories and sidebars coming at you straight from the Louisiana Superdome on Saturday.
It's going to be a great one, Dave, and I'm excited, and I really expect Rebels to roll on this one.
Again, you Rebel fans not able to make the trip down to New Orleans for such an early Saturday kickoff. This game will be televised on FSN all across the United States. So tune in, be loud, be proud, and help pull these Ole Miss Rebels, whether it be from the seats of the Superdome or the couch in your living room, on to victory number 3 Very important for Ole Miss to be 3-1 as SEC play is right around the corner.
No doubt. It's time to build up some of that swag, as Coach Free said, and swag out in New Orleans.
For Brandon Redd, I'm David Johnson. Thank you for joining us this week for Freeze Frame, This Week in Ole Miss Football. Be safe, be careful, God bless, and hotty toddy.